Katie from the blog Hearts Content Farmhouse, and today what I want to show you how to do is to bake an authentic artisan style sourdough bread. That typically means a bread that is going to use no yeast. It's going to rely only on sourdough for its rise. It's going to have a thin, really brown crust, and then when you slice into it, you're going to see those really big air holes, which is what gives it that artisan style. A few things before we begin. This is not something I would recommend for a beginner bread baker. You do need quite a mature starter for this. So if you've just gotten your starter going, I would recommend that you look for recipes that use either a little bit of yeast to help out your starter or something that uses discard starter like muffins, pizza crust, English muffins, things like that are good for a less mature starter. But if your starter has been going for at least a couple months, and you want to try artisan style bread, I'm going to walk you through it step by step. Another thing you're going to need is quite a bit of gear. So you're going to need a Dutch oven, parchment paper, a digital scale, a proofing basket like this that has a French name that I'm not going to try to pronounce. And if you don't want to invest in all those things, you can still make artisan style bread. I have a recipe called sourdough bread on a budget that is similar to this, but you can do it without all of those little accessories. But when you have those things, it allows you to push your hydration levels even higher, and that is what gives you those really pretty big air holes that people really are looking for in sourdough. So without further ado, let me get started. Like I said, you need a digital scale, so I should get that. And sourdough is something that you really want to scale for because weighing your starter by volume and putting it into measuring cups is just messy. But when you have a scale, it just makes things easier. So I like to use a pretty bowl for this because it's out on the counter for so long and I don't want to look at an ugly one. So I'm going to zero my scale out. So it now reads, so my scale now reads 0 ounces, and I'm going to put in 7 ounces of starter. This has to be a very well-fed starter. Give it a little extra boost feeding a few hours before you begin to make sure that it's in really good shape. The starter is so important here. Don't do this with a wimpy starter and expect it to turn out well because it really won't. So 7 ounces of starter. And you can see how much easier it is weighing this than it would be scooping it into a cup. And now I'm going to do 13 ounces of bread flour using King Arthur brand. I think bread flour is really important here, but some people do their sourdough with whole wheat and get good results. I just personally don't really like whole wheat bread, so I don't do that. So 13 ounces of bread flour. I thought I was going to need another bag, but I did not. Need my salt, yeah? Just doing half a teaspoon of sugar. Okay. And now I'm going to use a product here called diastatic malt powder. And this is something that in sourdough recipes, or really any bread recipe, you can substitute this in place of the sugar, and it gives your bread a better rise and a more golden crust. This is available on Amazon. It is not expensive at all, but if you don't have it, you don't want to get it, sugar is an adequate substitute. So if you're using sugar, do half a teaspoon of sugar, and I'm going to do a half a teaspoon of this diastatic malt powder. Okay, and now I'm going to add my salt in a little bit, but before I add the salt, I'm going to add the water and let these ingredients sit and hydrate, and that's called autolyze. So I'm going to do that before I add my salt. Right now I just need my water. I'm going to do 9.25 ounces. Okay, so you just zero out your scale, pour till you see 9 ounces. The temperature of your water is not important as long as it's not hot, which would kill your starter. You don't have to worry about taking its temperature or anything like that. Just use common sense. Almost there. Okay. So now for the autolyze step, all we are doing is mixing this together. It's gonna look almost like a batter, which is gonna look weird. If you are used to baking bread, this is not gonna look like any type of dough that you have made before. And that's fine, don't be alarmed. So you can see how wet this is. It really almost looks like a muffin batter. It's very wet. This is about a 75% hydration recipe. Some actually go higher. This is about as high as I've had any success with. So like I said, we're gonna do autolyze now, which is just covering this mixture with a tea towel, leaving it out at room temperature, anywhere between 20 minutes to an hour. The time isn't really super important. All it's doing is just hydrating the flour so that when you go to knead this, you don't have little bits of unincorporated flour. So I'm gonna cover this up and we will be back in about 40 minutes. It's been sitting here for about 40 minutes in that step that we talked about, which is called autolyze. All the flour has been hydrated and the consistency of it has changed a little bit. It has started to thicken up slightly. You can see it's somewhat doughy, still very wet, not really something that would be super workable to bake with, but starting to tighten up. And now what we have to do is add our salt, because remember that was the one ingredient that we left out when we started this process. So I'm doing 1.5 teaspoons of salt in this recipe. If you don't put salt in your sourdough bread, it doesn't really have much flavor. So 1.5 teaspoons may sound like a lot, but it doesn't taste salty, it just has flavor. The reason that you don't add the salt in from the beginning is that it will affect that autolyze. First, start using your spoon and getting it incorporated. That you are eventually going to have to use your hands. And you can flip it out onto the counter, or you can just do it right here in this bowl. So it's going to be sticky, but you can see already how this gluten has started to really develop. So I'm going to do 40 turns. I'm going to do it on the counter so we can see a little better. So 1, just keep doing this 40 times. The salt is going to start incorporating. That grittiness that you're feeling is going to go away. And you're continuing to just smooth out this dough. And this is the only kneading that this dough is going to get. If you overwork it, you're not going to get those big air holes, you're going to get a tighter crumb. And I'll kind of stretch it out. See if I feel any salt. I don't. I haven't quite done my 40. So rises, which is a really long process, we're going to take it out every hour on the hour and give it a quick little fold, and that is going to help this dough keep developing its gluten. Do your first rise with this dough. It's going to be in a clean, lightly oiled bowl in a warm. Kitchen is warm, like 80 degrees. If it's summertime, that would work. You don't want it really warm, like proofing oven warm. You just want it not chilly. So anywhere from 80, 90 degrees, even the 70s would be fine. So I have this dough, I'm gonna put it here. And like I said, every hour, we're gonna come back and check on this, and we're gonna do this for 3 hours. And what we're doing is just kind of like redeveloping the shape of this loaf, because when we put it in, it's gonna kind of flop down. And then when we go to bake it, it's not gonna keep its shape. See how sort of floppy it does. But when we come back every hour and refold it, it just gives it a little extra bit of structure. Okay, it's 3 hours later. We've done our 3 folds of this dough where we came back once an hour, folded it back up into a ball to give it more structure. And now it is risen a little bit, but you can see it's not super puffy. And if you're used to bread making, it's not gonna look like when you're finished rising a yeast dough, and it's just really puffy and beautiful looking. It's bigger, but not by much. One thing we wanna do is if there's any air bubbles that you can see is go ahead and pop them. I used to leave them thinking that that was how I was gonna get those big air holes, but it's not. All that it does is raise to the surface and pop, and you get like a big misshapen blister that's popped on the surface of your bread. We don't want that. And now you can, since this dough is so high hydration and it just wants to sort of flop, you have to proof it in something that's going to give it structure. So we cannot proof it on a baking sheet and expect it to rise all on its own. We have to use what I talked about before, which is this proofing basket. If you don't have one of these, you can still do this. It just helps. You can see the shape of it. This is just like a really light basket. But if you had a bowl this shape and then you lined it with a tea towel, that would probably work as well. So this is a liner that came with the basket, and we are going to really heavily flour this liner to keep our dough from sticking. Most baking books will recommend that you use rice flour for lining your basket or for sprinkling on top of your sourdough, because it's extra white and it just gives a really, really pretty appearance. I don't have that, and I don't know, I feel like you have to draw the line somewhere on what you're going to buy for bread, and I have chosen not to do that yet. So I'm going to heavily flour this. See how much flour is going in. It's going to make a little bit of a mess. That's okay. And err on the side of too much over too little. Really floured. I don't want this pulled up at all. I want it pushed all the way down. I'm going to flour the sides and just kind of shake it in there. Again, if you don't flour it, it's going to stick. Now this, you have to think of this as upside down. Your loaf is going to go in here, and then when you remove it to bake it, you're going to lift up the basket and you're going to be looking down at the top of the loaf of bread. So you take your dough, which right now is pretty. We're going to do sort of a final shape. So a bubble has just formed. I'm going to pop it. And remember, your pretty round side is going down. So just drop it in. Okay, now I want to cover this tightly. I'm going to go ahead and do plastic wrap, spray with a little bit of cooking spray. And this goes in the fridge overnight, at least 12 hours. So I normally try to have this in the afternoon in preparation for the next day's loaf of bread at dinner time. So I'm going to cover it, pop it in the fridge, and then tomorrow we are going to take this out in the morning and decorate and bake it, and I will show you that then. Okay, so it is about 18 hours since we put our bread in the fridge to do its final proof. And now it is time to put it into our Dutch oven and bake it. If you don't have a Dutch oven, what you can do is put an empty baking sheet in your oven, allow it to heat up while your oven is preheating, and then pour a cup of water into that baking sheet. That's going to create steam. What the Dutch oven does is just traps the bread as it bakes. Any steam that it would give off gets trapped by the lid. So all you have to do is create steam if you don't have a Dutch oven. Now, this is our proofing basket. It's covered. We're going to see a little bit of flour on the top when we flip this out, but not a ton. And be confident when it comes time to flip this. Just go like this. Boop. And now we're gonna really gently lift it up. So you can remember how much flour we put on this liner, and it still probably could have done with a little bit more because this is sticking. You want to really be as gentle as possible because the whole point of this basket was for it to proof in a round shape. So if you just yank it off, you sort of wasted your time. Okay, now I don't love this look, how it's a little bit lumpy on top, but it's not the end of the world. More flour would have been a good idea. So what we're gonna do now is dust it with more flour, which is basically just for looks. And don't be alarmed when you take it out and it looks flatter than you expect. The steam that you're baking it with is going to create a lot of oven spring, which just means as it rises, it is going to puff up. I'm going to kind of smooth out this wrinkle the best I can. I'm going to flour generously. I really don't like this. I'm going to try and let it go. Okay, and now we're going to slash. If you have just, this is a special bread tool that is made just for slashing loaves. It's just a really sharp razor held with this handle. If you don't have it, a serrated knife is fine, but it's a little bit harder because it doesn't drag as smoothly. So I'm going to slash this way to try and disguise that. Your main slash, you want it to be deep. You can see how even this is dragging just a tad, even with how sharp it is. We'll just have to see how that looks when it comes out. And then you can do an X. You can do little things coming up here. There are all kinds of fancy things you can do. I really don't like this, so I'm gonna just do whatever I can to disguise that. And then I'm gonna do just a few smaller little slashes. This one's gonna be simple. Okay, and now what we're going to do is place this in the Dutch oven. The Dutch oven is cold, not cold, but room temperature. Some people preheat it. I don't do that because I find it kind of hard to work with. And kind of crinkle this down as much as you can, because it will take the shape of this parchment and you'll get lines if your parchment paper is lined. Try to keep it smooth. See a bubble, I'm just going to pop it. Okay. Now, it doesn't look like anything right now. It's not particularly beautiful. But you will see that as it goes in the oven, it's going to rise way, way up. And that design is going to turn into something pretty. So put the lid on. This is going to get baked in your oven at 450 for a total of about 50 minutes. I do 20 minutes with the lid on. That lets it rise as that steam comes out, and then I do 30 minutes with the lid off. So 450 degrees, go ahead and set your timer for 20 minutes, and then when the timer goes off, you're just removing the lid and it finishes baking. are all done. The oven spring turned out really great with this recipe. It's browned really well, and we have a nice rounded top. It did look a little iffy when we put it in the oven, like maybe it wasn't going to turn out well, but don't be discouraged when you see that, because having that lid on the Dutch oven and the steam that that creates sort of cures all the problems with your sourdough bread, and you're going to be really pleased when you take it out of the oven. So right away what we're going to do is just carefully lift it out here, the parchment, and we're going to set it on a cooling rack to cool at room temperature, and it needs to cool for at least 3 hours. So right now it is around 11 o'clock. I'm going to serve this with dinner. So don't forget that we had to start this yesterday morning to get it to this stage. So it's not that it's a hard recipe or that there's a lot of work to do. It's just that you have to do it in advance and give it all the time that it needs, because it can't be rushed. So we are going to cool for 3 hours. We will come back and slice it. It's always exciting to see what type of crumb structure you get in your loaf, because we're going for that big open crumb. Sometimes it works out great, sometimes it's a little bit disappointing. So we will check back here in 3 hours and see what we got.